I never know if someone would hurt a homeless person, especially a girl, for fun. And I never slept for more than a few hours because I was always cold and crying. But what hurt me the most was the embarrassment. I was embarrassed by what I had become, and if anyone I knew saw me. It started when my roommates told me they were dropping out of UC Merced, my university located in the California Central Valley. It was a surprise because they always told me how much they loved it here, and now I need to find new roommates to help split the costs or pay $800 on my own. I didn't have that kind of money because Walmart only paid me $11 an hour as a part-time representative. That same day, my boss told me that they were overstaffed and that he'd been cutting my hours and that I wasn't needed. I told him that I needed this job and that I was struggling and asked if he could schedule me more hours, but he didn't care and said it wasn't his problem. I had nothing in my bank account, and the only people that could help me was my family. So I called asking for help just so I can get back on my feet. They told me that I was on my own and that if you mess yourself up, you'll mess us up too. I didn't know how to respond. I felt worthless and abandoned. I didn't have any money, I was late on my apartment rent, I was going to lose my job, and my own family didn't want anything to do with me. One day, I got into an argument with my boss, and all I wanted to do was to go to bed and sleep. But as I walked up to my door and pulled out my keys, I saw an eviction notice taped to my front door. I had missed 3 months of rent and had 15 days to pay $2,400 or move out. I didn't have that kind of money, so I had 15 days to pack everything in my apartment and leave, or else they'd take it all. But there was no way I could do that in time. I didn't have the money for a storage facility, no car to move it someplace else, and none of my friends had room. When the day came, I did the only thing I could, which was pack as much as I could hold. I packed my suitcase with clothes, personal hygiene products, and valuable items. I packed my backpack with all of my school materials and a purse with smaller items. I carried it all, and before I closed the door, I grabbed my stuff and stared at my room, remembering one last time the life I was leaving behind. I kept wondering how I let things get this far, or how I didn't try hard enough, or how I should have been more prepared. But in the end, none of that mattered because now I was homeless. The only place I could think of was the park. I found a bench that became my bed and used my backpack as a pillow, and my largest sweater as a blanket to keep me warm. I remember how some nights that wasn't enough to keep me warm and I curled up into a ball and go to bed shivering. Every night that I laid on that bench, I'd look over my shoulder, constantly afraid that someone would harm me or take my things. I never know if someone would hurt a homeless person, especially a girl, for fun. But what hurt me the most was the embarrassment. I was embarrassed by what I had become, and if anyone I knew saw me. I had to think outside of the box to survive. So I used nearby apple tree as food, which was, for the most part, were either sour or going rotten. But it was all I had, so I couldn't complain. I would search for recycling bins and pick the cleanest bottle I could find to fill them up at the school drinking fountains for water. Before sundown, I'd fill my water bottle one last time and go into the park to sleep on my bench. And if no one was around, I would use the bathroom sinks to wet a cloth and wipe down my body so I wouldn't smell. I did this for weeks, living off anything I could find, filling up used bottles and sleeping on the park bench, cold and alone. Thankfully, I never saw any of my friends while I was living in the park, and honestly, I don't know if they ever saw me. But where I would see them was in grocery stores, where I'd watch them fill their baskets of fresh fruit and vegetables, chips and soda, and imagine myself enjoying their meals. I hated the grocery store, because it was where I would shoplift small things so I wouldn't starve. I was never proud of myself for what I did, and to this day, I still live with my shame of staring at granola bars, debating if I should put it in my bag or go into the park and eat my rotten apples. It took a month until I found a nearby homeless shelter that was accepting people off the wait list. It was a tiny warehouse with half the place being a kitchen and dining area, and the other being split between men and women at bedtime. Most of the people were scary, especially the men. On my first night, one guy tried to touch me, and when I told him to stop, he would ask if I would go to bed with him. Others stared at me like I was a play toy or a piece of meat because to them, I was a prize. Some came straight out of jail and couldn't go home until their parole was over, while others had mental issues and couldn't live independently on their own. Even though I didn't feel completely safe, I realized that most homeless people never chose to be homeless. They were practically forced into their situation, and this was their only option. The shelter had a soup kitchen filled with volunteers from a food bank and church. They only had enough to give us one meal a day, usually dinner time. And the days where I was able to eat, I would wait in a line that ran around the building. Sometimes I would have to wait in the rain, and other times it would be freezing cold or blazing hot. We didn't have a choice in what we wanted, and you couldn't be a picky eater or else you wouldn't eat anything. I grew up to appreciate the soup kitchen because it became the only real meal I ever ate. To this day, I'm incredibly grateful to all the volunteers and people who donated their time and food to us. Even though I was homeless, I still went to class. I tried my best, but I couldn't keep up with my schedule and started to fall behind. I was in danger of losing my scholarship, and I had to make a choice between school or work, because I would often find myself rushing to the shelter too late for food or locked out. If I got to the shelter after 7, they'd run out of food and I'd go hungry for a day. And if I arrived at the shelter later than 20 minutes, they'd either give away my bed and I would have to sleep outside the park. So every day I had to make the decision to go to work and go hungry and sleep in the park, or go to class and have a roof over my head. I chose school. It wasn't enough, and when my friends began noticing my grades drop, I decided to tell them that I was homeless. I told them I lost my apartment and had been sleeping in the shelter, that my family refused to help me unless I helped myself, and I told them that most days I went hungry. I wasn't asking for attention or a handout. I only wanted to tell them what I was going through. I just wanted someone to tell me that everything was going to be fine. Instead, I ended up losing them as friends because they didn't like the idea of having a homeless girl in their circle. Instead, they threw their food scraps at me and called me a dog wanting attention. They even called me fat and told me to give up since it was the universe's way of telling me that I was unwanted. No one offered a single dime or even their leftovers. They just made me feel less than human and helpless. I decided to contact my family one last time for help. This time, I wasn't asking for money, food, or shelter. I just wanted to know there was someone out there who cared. But I couldn't even have that. And when I told them my situation, they judged me and threw everything I did wrong in my face. They made me feel like an unwanted mistake. For months, I wouldn't hear from them no matter how many times I called asking to explain. They didn't want anything to do with me, not even call me their child. The last thing they told me was, now that I was homeless, their help would go unappreciated and would go to waste. And even if they did help, I would end up homeless again, back on the street as another beggar. There was one silver lining in all of this. I found a community of friends that understood what it was like to be homeless. In the shelter, I met Angela, who had been homeless for about 2 years. She was a sweetheart, always treating me like her own daughter and looking after me as best as she could. There was also an African-American man named Curtis, who became my best friend and the brother that I've always wanted. We became a family, always supporting one another, always leaning on each other's shoulders whenever any of us felt down. No one wanted to speak or be associated with a homeless person. I'm sure not even you, but we knew who we were, and we understood what it meant to be human. Not rich, nor poor, just human. I ended up losing my scholarship and was forced to drop out of school. I would be lying if I didn't say I felt like a failure, but I would also be lying if I said it didn't push me harder. I enrolled in a community college where they were able to provide me with a small grant that made me into a part-time student. For the next 2 years, I spent my time studying and living in the shelter working towards my associate's degree in political science and law. When I finally walked up to grab my diploma, there wasn't a single person in the audience who knew that I was homeless. I didn't have a group of friends cheering me on, I didn't have family waving at me, no balloons, flower, or a single hug. But none of that mattered because when I grabbed that diploma for the first time, I knew what I sacrificed to achieve my goal. Today, I work as a recruiter at a customer service call center. There are welfare events at my work that help sponsor and raise money to get homeless people off the streets. And even though I don't have a lot of money, it's rewarding to give back to the community, especially the community that helped me during my weekend pride. Because of my situation, I grew to really respect the people and programs that were offered to homeless people. I want to give back in any way I can, and because I can't with money, I do it with my time. I hope you will too, because even though life is threatening, you feel scared and uncertain about what lies ahead, or you feel like your problems are never ending, regardless if it's financially, educationally, and even personal life, you just have to trust in the decisions you make and believe that you will succeed and that you'll make it. Because in the end, you will.